At 8:03 a.m., the internet simply stopped. For a long minute, people assumed it was a glitch. Servers hiccup, providers curse, and everything hums back to life. But this time, the icons on phones froze like a flock of trapped birds, and the little circular loaders spun in place with no promise of arrival. Notifications stopped arriving mid-breath. Coffee shops blinked offline signs. Apartment elevators returned to paper schedules. And the city felt like someone had muted a vast, distant orchestra. Mira stood by her window and watched neighbors appear in doorways to ask one another what they had done with the day. Conversation spread like a new, awkward vine. The first week was improvisation. Markets invented barter queues, supermarkets taught cashiers to write prices in thick marker, and a man with a ham radio became an unlikely postman. He tapped names and messages into a device, and out of static came other voices. Answers banged back like a punctured garden hose. People learned paper once more. They put up notices, slipped notes under doors, and folded letters they had once only typed. Mira bought pasta with coins she had almost forgotten, and she discovered that counting change felt like learning to spell again. Without a river of feeds pulling attention away, the city's edges sharpened, streets mattered. The bookshop on the corner, which had been a soft blur of recommendations and ads, became a place to ask for a book and meet a face. Music returned to its sources. A busker revived a violin piece, a man with a saw found an audience, and people applauded without filming. The fountain by the square took on a new schedule: chess at 6, stories at 4, a swap of goods at noon. A photocopied newspaper emerged, printed by volunteers, its headlines small rebellions against silence. Mira read the classifieds as if they were treasure maps, and learned that someone offered sewing lessons and another needed a ladder. Not everything warmed into something better. A bakery missed a delivery because an email never sent. A doctor's form that relied on a medical portal delayed care for a patient until paper and kindness could catch up. Jobs scheduled through sites vanished like theater tickets. For many, the inconvenience was real and sharp. For others, the loss was an odd relief, a break from the pressure to perform, to like, to curate. People rediscovered slowness. Plans had to be spoken aloud. Invitations were nailed to lampposts. Phone calls stretched longer because time was no longer measured by alerts, but by the small narrations that people offered one another. As the third week dawned, routines had hardened into something durable, yet fragile. Parents arranged playdates on bench corners. Neighbors swapped sugar and stories. Mira began to notice names where once had been avatars. The city sounded different, less like a chorus of solitudes and more like a neighborhood band. Stars returned to evenings that had once been washed by blue light. She received visitors who had never come before because there had been no quick message to say, "I'm outside." Even enemies softened into human-sized problems when you passed them carrying the same groceries. Rumors of restoration arrived like weather reports, hopeful, then cautious. Technicians were seen unpacking cables, tracing the arteries of a system most had taken for granted. On the 29th day, the ham radio operator relayed that the backbone was humming again. Connections would be tested and then restored. People sat with a peculiar kind of patience, as if the more patient the city was, the sweeter the return would be. The internet reappeared one morning at 7:12 with no trumpet and no funeral. Messages cascaded inward like a flood that had been patiently bottled. Notifications bloomed as if a field had suddenly flowered. Ads, feeds, and group chats surged, impatient and familiar. Yet the city had been rescripted. The bulletin board still bore new paper notes. The chess set had reserved evenings. The ham radio man still came by to test the waves. People opened their devices and for a moment compared the screen to the room. Both were valuable, and neither was everything. Mira typed a message to her brother and paused, composing it with the care of someone who had relearned to send more than a thought into the void. She walked to the fountain and watched the player move a knight as other hands turned pages in print. The feed returned, but voice, eye contact, and paper remained. The outage had been a theft and a gift, stolen time, returned with interest, teaching them that connection could exist without speed, that listening could be deliberate, that the human web was stitched not only from cables but from the small, stubborn rituals people kept when nothing else was broadcasting.